Hi, this is a quick discussion of the subsidy diagram from Barriers to Trade from the International Trade section of the IB syllabus. I'm going to assume that you already know about the closed economy model, and when we open up to free trade, we institute or we set up world price, and there's a world supply. So we're assuming we're a small country, and there's basically an infinite quantity available at this price. So that's what that supply curve is representing. So when we open up to free trade, we create a problem for domestic producers, just like in the other diagram. So I'll mark that out here. Q1 is now the amount that domestic producers will be making, and you can see that on the diagram in this distance. So this is the domestic producer supply curve at that price. They will be willing to produce that much, and that's Q1. The domestic consumer, or the buyer, as we're calling them in this part of the course, is going to be buying Q2. And then we know that all of the remaining distance between Q1 and Q2, this is all going to be imports now. So that whole distance is imports. So what a subsidy does is it tries to support the domestic producer, and we'll mark that out and show how. So much like our subsidy diagram in microeconomics, we are going to use a change of the supply curve to denote this. So a subsidy will effectively cause the domestic supply to shift to the right, and you can either take a look back at microeconomics to understand why, but we'll also discuss why in a moment. Much like in microeconomics, the distance between the two curves, whoops, that is the wrong pen. The distance between the two curves is the amount of the subsidy, and that's going to be consistent through the course, and that's the case in both of these. So here what we can see is now there's a new intersection point. So the new intersection point, we said over here that the domestic supply where it meets P world is what the domestic producer is going to make. Now, at P world, because the supply curve is shifted over, this is now the supply curve domestic plus subsidy, because of that subsidy it's shifted over, we now have a new intersection. So the intersection is, this is what they're willing to make, and at that price. So that intersection is right there. And we can say that that is going to be, let's see if I can use the erase tool live. It doesn't look like I can. I'm going to be a little bit unorthodox here and mark that as Q3 right up here. But I'm referring to this point and that output. So we know from this diagram that the domestic supplier is getting paid the world price, and therefore they're making this much. But don't forget, all we're doing with a subsidy diagram is we're distorting the market, and we're giving them extra money to make them behave as if we are on their original supply curve. And you can see that here, because now, as I noted over here, that there's a subsidy distance in here. There's money paid from the government to the supplier. That's also the same as this distance here. So we can in effect say they are getting paid this part from the consumer, and they are getting paid this part from the government. So the amount that they're getting is actually P DOM plus subsidy. So now, under this new setup, we have replaced some of these imports. So that distance is no longer the import distance. What's the import distance now is the distance between Q3 and Q2. So that is the new imports. And I'm going to have to be a little bit unorthodox here and put that up above, imports, after the subsidy. Believe it or not, that's an R. The domestic production has increased, so now domestic producers I'm making everything from the origin all the way over to Q3. So the domestic producer revenue is now this whole area in here. Foreign producer revenue is now this whole area in here. This area here has been lost to the foreign producer and has been captured by the domestic producer. When we look up above, we have to account for this area up here. This is the amount spent by the government. So the government is spending some distance here times some quantity here. And that is the total of the government subsidy. So you can mark out this space and say, okay, that's the spending by government. Government is spending that much money to cause the domestic producers to make it. You're going to have in here a deadweight loss. Why? Because you are asking the production to shift from P world represents the world price. You can get those goods. You can get as many goods as you want at the world price. You're no longer going to have them made at the world price. You're going to have them made at the higher domestic price. So you're paying all of this extra money to shift production to your domestic suppliers. This is an efficiency loss or a deadweight loss. This trapezoid over here is part of the domestic producer surplus now. It's everything under the price that they get and above the supply curve. So we can mark that out with red just for fun if we want to. That's the new, or that's added to producer surplus. So there's some inefficiency, there's some harm to the foreign importer, and there's a help to the domestic importer. And don't forget the significant amount of money that the government has to spend. Okay, hope that helps.